Ma'am, this really isn't the kind of place for people like you." The words sliced through the air before Mrs. Clara Vance even had a chance to take off her gloves. They came from a woman in a pearl-white dress near the bar, loud enough for half the foyer of L'Horizon to hear, soft enough to pretend she wasn't talking to Clara at all. A couple nearby hid their smirks behind champagne flutes. A man in a navy suit shook his head slowly, like he was watching a mistake unfold in real time. Clara paused under the chandelier's icy light. She stood barely 5'3", wrapped in a lavender Sunday hat and a coat that had belonged to her for decades. Her steps were slow, but steady. She looked like somebody's grandmother walking into a place that never expected a grandmother like her to exist. L'Horizon, the crown jewel of downtown Chicago's upscale dining scene, was all marble floors, white linen tables, and conversations whispered as if the air itself could shatter. It was a space designed for polished airs tech elites and the kind of people who never wondered if they belonged. And into this perfectly curated space walked a 76-year-old black woman from the South Side. The foyer quieted fast. Not silent, quiet, the way a room gets when it's judging you. Eyes followed her, scanning the coat, the hat, the sensible shoes, measuring her, deciding where to place her on their invisible chart. Clara didn't shrink. She'd lived long enough to know exactly who she was. But even she could feel it. The shift in air, the old familiar chill, the weight that always tries to remind black folks where the world thinks they belong. The maitre d' Julien moved toward her with a smile so polished it felt like another glass decoration. He clutched his tablet to his chest, stopping just close enough so she couldn't claim he was ignoring her, but far enough to signal he didn't want her too close. "Good evening." "Ma'am," he said, hesitating on the last word. "Are you looking for someone?" "No," Clara replied softly. "I'm here for dinner." Julien blinked twice as if he needed to reboot. "Dinner? Oh, well, unfortunately, we are fully booked tonight." Clara looked over his shoulder at half a dozen empty tables. She didn't point at them, didn't need to. "I can wait," she said. A few heads turned at the warmth in her voice, the way her vowels rolled smooth, southern sweet but firm under the sugar. Julian's jaw tightened. "Well..." He glanced around, searching for support. Nobody stepped in, but several guests pretended to check their phones, pretending not to hear what was happening. It was the kind of quiet that felt like a wall. "If you really want to wait..." Julian sighed. "I suppose we can seat you..." Briefly. He turned and led her past the dining room with the posture of someone guiding a child away from danger. He didn't offer to take her coat, didn't ask her name, and he definitely didn't walk slow enough for her pace. He pointed to a small, shaky table near the kitchen doors, the kind of spot regular guests would have complained about as soon as they sat down. Pots clattered behind the swinging doors. Cold air rushed out every time a server pushed through. Clara lowered herself into the chair, with grace smoothing her skirt as if she were being seated at the finest table in the room. She set her gloves beside her plate, unbothered by the noise, or at least pretending not to be. A server hurried past her with 2 plates of seared scallops. Another poured wine for a couple celebrating something expensive. Laughter bubbled from a booth full of lawyers in silk ties. Life went on around Clara as if she wasn't even there, except she felt every stare, every microsecond of dismissal, every familiar warning tugging at her ribs, telling her she wasn't welcome. But she had lived through worse than stares. Clara folded her hands, closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed deep. She'd come here for her own reasons, reasons nobody in that room knew yet, and she wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Somewhere in the kitchen, behind the swinging doors, someone yelled behind, and metal clashed against metal. Clara didn't know it yet, but on the other side of that door stood the one person who would change everything in this room, the one person none of them expected. But for now, she waited, calm, unshaken, a storm, gathering quietly in lavender and pearls. What Clara didn't know, and what the whole restaurant was about to learn, is that the moment those kitchen doors swing open, everything changes. Because the man walking out isn't just any chef. He's the one person whose truth will flip this entire story upside down. The kitchen doors swung open just long enough for a blast of cold air to hit Clara's back. A young server carrying a tray of sparkling water glanced at her, hesitated, then walked right past without stopping. Not even a nod. Not even a, "I'll be right with you." It was the kind of small dismissal that people pretended wasn't disrespectful unless you'd lived with it your whole life. Clara rested her hands on the table, keeping them still. She wasn't new to this game. She knew exactly what was happening. A couple at the next table leaned toward each other, whispering. The woman angled her body away from Clara, placing her purse on the opposite side of her chair like she was shielding it. The man kept glancing at Clara's coat, then at the rest of her outfit, like he was adding up numbers that didn't look right to him. "Do you think she wandered in by mistake?" the woman whispered, not as quietly as she thought. Probably, the man replied. "Some people don't check the prices before they walk into places like this." Clara heard every word. The room wasn't loud enough to hide insults. It never was. She adjusted her lavender hat not nervously, but with intention, like setting a crown straight. Still no one approached her table. 10 minutes passed, then 12, then 15. Servers glided around her like she was a piece of furniture someone forgot to move. One poured Bordeaux for a pair of corporate guys wearing matching tailored suits. Another delivered 3 courses to a couple celebrating an anniversary. Every time someone passed, Clara lifted her eyes just enough for them to see she was alert, polite waiting. And every time they pretended she wasn't sitting right there. Finally, Bryce, the waiter assigned to her section, appeared. Tall, mid-20s hair, slicked back too sharply, apron too clean. He approached with an expression halfway between annoyance and disbelief, like someone told him to take out the trash while he was trying to take a break. He didn't smile, didn't greet her, didn't introduce himself. He just stood there tapping his pen against his notepad like he had somewhere better to be. So he said, "You realize this is a tasting menu restaurant, right?" Clara lifted her chin subtly. "Yes, I'm aware." Bryce tilted his head like he wasn't convinced. "The menu starts at $200 per person." He said it, slowly emphasizing each word like he was breaking down fractions for a student he assumed couldn't count. Clara didn't flinch. "I'll have the chef's special." Bryce blinked, caught off guard, then recovered with a smirk. "That's reservation only, and we don't do substitutions." "I'm not asking for a substitution," she replied. "Just the chef's special." His smirk fell flat. Her calm was throwing him off. "Well, we also don't serve sweet tea," he added, sarcasm slipping into his tone. "In case you were planning to ask." Clara folded her napkin neatly across her lap. "I'll still take a glass if you can manage it." A couple at the nearby table snickered, not loudly, just enough. Bryce leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not his attitude. "Look, maybe this place isn't really for you. There's a diner 2 blocks over that might be more comfortable." Clara looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was steady, firm. A message in silence. But Bryce pushed on. "Honestly, I need this table for guests who actually fit the ambiance." He reached for the extra napkins on her table, as if he were preparing to reset it for someone else, someone better, someone he thought deserved to be there. Clara kept her voice soft. "Are you asking me to leave?" "I'm saying," Bryce replied, straightening up, "that this table needs to be turned over, quickly." A wave of discomfort rippled through nearby guests. Nobody intervened. Nobody spoke up. A few watched, pretending to be fascinated by the scandal, but not enough to stop it. Others stared at their phones, avoiding eye contact, wanting to disappear into the linen-white safety of the room. Clara's jaw tightened, not with fear, but with something old, something earned, something passed through generations of people who'd learned how to stand tall without raising their voice. She didn't move. She didn't reach for her coat. She didn't apologize. She simply breathed slow and measured, grounding herself the way black elders have always done in the face of disrespect. And just as Bryce opened his mouth to push her again, the kitchen doors slammed open behind her. A voice boomed out, sharp and unmistakably irritated. who sat someone by the kitchen, Clara didn't turn around, but the room did. And for the first time since she entered L'Horizon, the attention shifted away from her, toward the man about to change everything. But just as Bryce leaned in to push Clara out for good, the kitchen doors slammed open hard, and the voice that came through wasn't angry, it was commanding. The kind of voice that changes a room. Nobody knew it yet. But this was the moment everything started to turn. The kitchen doors swung shut behind the voice, and just like that, the entire dining room turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Forks hung in midair. Even the soft music humming through the speakers seemed to take a breath. Bryce straightened, smoothing the front of his apron. He looked almost relieved, as if whoever stepped out of that kitchen would finally help him fix the situation. Clara didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel the tension behind her thick heavy, the kind that told her someone important was about to walk through. A pair of slow, controlled footsteps approached, the kind of walk that belonged to a man who didn't rush for anyone. The dining room parted slightly as staff stepped aside, giving him a clear path. Then, he spoke again, closer this time. Why is this guest sitting next to the kitchen doors? The question wasn't loud, but it hit the room with enough weight to make people sit up straighter. There was steel in his voice, clean, precise, dangerous if you stepped the wrong way. Clara lifted her eyes just a little. She still didn't turn around. Bryce cleared his throat. Chef Marcus, I put her here because the main floor is pretty full tonight. You know how it gets on weekends. Marcus Vance didn't respond right away. He stepped around Clara's table and finally came into her line of sight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a pristine chef's coat with the embroidered gold lettering M. Vance, Executive Chef. His face was sharp-focused, the kind of face that didn't tolerate shortcuts in the kitchen or anywhere else. Sweat glimmered at his temples, proof that he'd been working hard, but his eyes were laser-steady. And those eyes flicked from Clara to Bryce, with a look that could have cut through cast iron. Clara sat up a little straighter. She knew that look. She had seen it on that same face decades earlier on a boy who refused to let anyone tell him what he couldn't do. But she didn't say a word. Marcus placed a hand on the back of the empty chair across from Clara. Not sitting, just grounding himself. Watching, assessing. The same way he'd inspect a dish before it left the kitchen. Full, he asked quietly. That what you said? Bryce shifted his weight. Well, the reservations? Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the half-empty dining room. Several guests looked down at their plates, immediately pretending they weren't a part of the lie. Marcus said, just that one sound, but somehow it still made Bryce swallow hard. Clara's hands rested gently on her lap, calm, steady. Everything around her felt tense, but her presence stayed soft, like she was holding the room together without even moving. Bryce tried again. Chef, she didn't seem like, well, she didn't tell us Marcus cut in. Didn't seem like what the question dropped like a stone into a quiet lake. No ripples, just impact. Bryce froze. A couple of diners exchanged looks. Someone coughed. Someone else pretended to adjust their silverware. Clara inhaled slowly, a long, deep breath. She could feel her pulse pressing against her skin, but she kept her posture loose, her shoulders relaxed. It was the same kind of quiet dignity she had leaned on her entire life, on buses, in waiting rooms, at workplaces, at stores where clerks pretended not to see her. Black dignity wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Marcus took a step closer to Bryce. Finish your sentence, he said. What exactly didn't she seem like? Bryce's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Clara spoke. First, soft, steady, warm, like a memory of Sunday afternoons. It's fine, baby. No need for a scene. But Marcus didn't look away from Bryce. No, there is, because he was just about to tell me why he thought my guest didn't belong here. The room shifted again, uncomfortable, restless. Clara didn't raise her voice, didn't straighten like she was ready for a fight. Instead, she placed one hand lightly on the table, grounding herself. I'm all right, she said. I've been through worse things than a shaky table. It was the kind of line that held generations behind it. The kind of line every black listener understood instantly. Marcus's jaw clenched. You shouldn't have to be all right. Not here. He finally broke eye contact with Bryce and turned fully toward Clara. The moment he looked at her, really looked at her, his stern expression shifted, softened. Just barely. Most people in the room missed it. Clara didn't. She had watched that boy grow into that man. Watched him learn to stand tall in rooms that weren't built for him. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. This shouldn't have happened to you, he said quietly. Clara gave him a small, knowing smile, the kind only a mother or someone close enough to be one could give. She didn't correct him, didn't reassure him, didn't brush it away. She simply let the truth sit between them. Marcus straightened, turning his attention back to the staff. Get her a proper table, he said, sharply. Now. But Bryce just stood there, silent, pale, completely frozen. And for the first time that night, Clara felt the beginning of a shift. Not victory, not justice, not yet, but a shift, a promise. Something was coming, something the whole room was about to learn. Bryce didn't move, not an inch. His face had gone from smug confidence to full panic, the kind of panic that comes from realizing the situation was never what he thought it was. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. It was like every excuse he had rehearsed suddenly evaporated under the weight of Marcus Vance's stare. But Marcus didn't wait. He stepped beside Clara's table, glanced at the wobbly legs, then looked around the room. Really looked. Every pair of eyes pretending not to watch. Every stiff shoulder. Every untouched glass of wine. You could feel the discomfort ripple across the dining room like heat waves off hot pavement. This isn't acceptable, Marcus said, voice low but sharp, and it stops now. The words didn't need volume. They carried power on their own. Bryce finally managed to swallow. Chef, I was just trying to keep the ambiance Marcus cut in. Is that what we're calling it? Bryce flinched. A woman at a nearby table whispered, "Oh my God," gripping her husband's arm, like she'd just realized she was watching a wildfire start from a single spark. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his chef's coat brushing Clara's chair. Explain something to me, he said to Bryce. Why did you assume she didn't belong here? Bryce's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. Nobody offered, not a single hand, not even a sympathetic nod. It was suddenly very clear he was alone. I didn't assume, he stammered. Yes, Marcus said, calmly. You did. The silence turned sharper. Clara kept her gaze lowered, but her breathing had changed, slow, controlled the kind of breath a person takes when a moment slices deeper than it should. She didn't want a scene. Didn't want attention. She never wanted that. But she wasn't going to run either. She placed a hand over her purse, steady and elegant. A gesture grounded not in fear, but in dignity. The kind she had carried her whole life. Marcus's voice dropped even lower. I asked you a question. Finish your sentence from earlier. You said she didn't seem like. What Bryce shook his head. I didn't mean anything. That's the problem, Marcus said. You didn't think before you acted. You didn't look before you judged. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't angry. She was tired. The kind of tired that came from being treated like a problem instead of a person. Bryce tried one more time. Chef, you have to understand she made some of the guests uncomfortable. A loud clatter echoed across the restaurant. A server had dropped a tray, shocked by the boldness of those words. The metallic crash rang through the room, slicing through the tension. Marcus turned his head slowly toward Bryce. Uncomfortable, he repeated. Explain that to me. What exactly about her made anyone uncomfortable, Bryce couldn't answer. His mouth opened and closed like a busted hinge. Clara spoke up softly, her voice steady as Sunday morning. Baby, let it go. I've lived long enough to know what he meant. You don't need to drag this out. But Marcus shook his head. No, ma'am. I do. He stepped around the table so he was standing directly beside Bryce. The height difference suddenly felt dramatic, one man steady as a mountain, the other shrinking like a shadow at dusk. You tried to remove her, Marcus said quietly from a restaurant she has every right to be in. A restaurant she helped build in ways you don't even understand. Bryce frowned. Helped build. What do you mean? Marcus didn't answer, not yet. But his silence held weight, a promise of truth on the horizon. A murmur spread through the dining room. People leaned closer. Forks froze. Someone whispered, "Wait, does he know her?" Clara shifted in her seat, her hands resting gently on the tablecloth. She still hadn't raised her voice, still hadn't broken her composure. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was history. Restraint. Strength learned through decades of navigating rooms like this one. Marcus exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled breath. "Let me be clear," he said. "Nobody tells her she doesn't belong anywhere." Bryce's face drained of color. Clara looked up at Marcus, and for the first time that night, their eyes met, really met. And she saw something in him she recognized immediately. The moment before a truth hits the world like a hammer. The moment before a son stands up for the woman who raised him. The room held its breath. And the truth, her truth, was coming. "Hi, friend. Before we continue, I need your help. We've noticed the channel losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and helps us keep delivering great content for you. Your support means everything. Comment your city or country below. Let's see how far this community reaches. Thank you. Now, back to the story. The dining room went still. Not just quiet, still. Like the entire place suddenly realized something was shifting and nobody wanted to miss it. Marcus stood tall beside Clara's table, the bright kitchen lights behind him outlining his frame like a spotlight. His chef's coat looked almost too white against the tension in the air. Bryce finally found his voice. "Chef, I didn't know she was connected to you." Marcus turned to him slowly, as if choosing every inch of movement deliberately. "That's just it," he said. "You weren't supposed to need a connection to treat her with respect." The words landed like a stone dropped into cold water, deep, heavy, and impossible to ignore. A middle-aged man in a navy blazer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A woman near the bar lowered her drink, watching with wide eyes. It wasn't just Bryce who felt the heat now. The whole room did. Marcus pulled out the chair across from Clara and sat not with the hurried drop of someone flustered, but with the confidence of a man who owned the building. He adjusted his sleeves, placed his hands on the table, and met his mother's gaze. "Ma," he said gently, "you shouldn't be sitting here." Clara gave a tiny smile, soft but amused. "I've sat in worse places, baby. Besides, I wasn't planning to stay long." "You were planning to sit on the ground if you had to," Marcus replied quietly. "Because once you decide to walk into a room, nobody on this earth can push you out." She chuckled. "You always were dramatic." The exchange was small, subtle, but the staff around them froze. The guests stared. There was no hiding it. Now this wasn't just any older black woman. This was someone important to the man who ran the entire restaurant. Marcus turned to Bryce again, the softness gone. "Do you know how many people I've fired for less than what you did tonight?" Bryce swallowed so hard his throat clicked. "Chef, I was just..." What Marcus cut in, protecting my ambiance. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room, nervous, guilty, the kind that slips out when people recognize something true but don't want to admit it. Marcus didn't smile. "My mother taught me how to handle knives long before any of you ever stepped into a kitchen," he said. "She taught me flavor balance discipline. She taught me hospitality." He tapped the table lightly. "And you sat her by the kitchen doors like she was an inconvenience." A server near the corner shifted his weight, looking down, as if ashamed for not stepping in earlier. Two women at a nearby table whispered, "Oh, wow. She's his mother." The truth finally hit the room like a cold gust of winter air. Clara sat quietly through all of it. not absorbing the moment like someone craving validation, but like someone who'd known the truth long before anyone else discovered it. Marcus continued, voice low but controlled. Every dish you serve in this restaurant is inspired by her cooking. Every flavor. You brag about every menu item people post online. She taught it to me first. Bryce's lips parted, disbelief mixing with fear. I didn't know. You didn't bother to know, Marcus replied. You didn't ask her name. You didn't welcome her. You didn't offer her water. You didn't offer help. You looked at her and made a decision. He let the words linger. That's the entire issue. Bryce's face flushed red. He stepped back, bumping into a table behind him. A woman at that table pulled her plate closer as if distance could keep her out of the spotlight. Clara's hands remained folded neatly. She didn't rise to defend herself, didn't rise to attack. Her silence was a kind of power steady, heavy untouchable. Marcus leaned back slightly, inhaling deeply. You know what really makes a guest uncomfortable. Bryce. Watching someone get mistreated. Watching disrespect happen right in front of them. The room reacted, shoulders tensed, eyes widened. A few people sat straighter as if forced to acknowledge their own complicity. Because that, Marcus said, gesturing to Clara, that's the woman who raised me, the woman who survived things I can't imagine. The woman whose recipes pay your paycheck. Clara touched his wrist gently. Baby, she said, don't forget to breathe. Marcus exhaled, grounding himself. His mother's voice always had that effect, cool water on a flame that threatened to rise too high. Then he looked around the room one more time, slow sweeping, making sure every guest, every server, every hidden whisperer heard his next words clearly. She belongs here, he said, more than anybody in this room. The floor seemed to vibrate with the weight of it. In that moment, under those chandeliers, at that wobbly little table, in a room full of people who had judged her the second she walked in, Clara Vance didn't have to raise her voice. Her son raised the roof for her, and everyone knew the power in that truth. The dining room felt different now, tight-heightened, like every breath people took had weight. The chandelier lights seemed brighter, sharper, illuminating every uncomfortable expression in the room. Bryce stood frozen with his apron twisted in his hands, the confidence he walked in with completely gone. Marcus leaned forward, elbows resting on the table across from Clara. His voice stayed low, but the entire restaurant heard it anyway. You want to know something, Bryce, he said. This woman right here, she's the reason I ever picked up a knife in the first place. A soft murmur swept across the room. Curiosity mixed with guilt. The kind of guilt that comes from realizing you misjudged someone badly and publicly. Clara sighed gently. Marcus, she whispered, you don't need to, but he shook his head. No, Ma. Tonight they're gonna hear it. He pushed back from the table and stood turning to address the staff first, then the guests, then the room itself as if the walls needed to hear too. She taught me everything I know about food, Marcus said. Everything. Before cooking shows, before awards, before interviews, there was her. Standing over a stove in our kitchen on 87th Street, making the kind of meals people would pay hundreds for if they had any sense. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly recognizing the flavors they admired came from a place far deeper than a fancy French fusion menu. Marcus continued. While you were deciding she didn't fit your version of ambiance, she was the one who taught me discipline, timing, balance, hospitality. She taught me to respect every ingredient and every person who walks through a door. His eyes narrowed slightly, especially the ones black folks get ignored for being. Bryce began to stammer. Chef, I really didn't know she was. Marcus didn't let him finish. That's not the point. You shouldn't have needed a title or a connection to treat her right. Clara lifted her chin a little, watching her son with a mixture of pride and quiet sadness. She wasn't surprised at his words. She had always known he had fire in him. She had raised him to survive rooms just like this, and he had done more than survive. He had risen above them. Marcus took a breath, steady, but charged. You see these chandeliers, this marble floor, these handcrafted tables, all of this, he said. Sweeping a hand around the room exists because somebody like her taught me what I know. Her hands built me. Her recipes built this place. He paused, letting the room absorb it. She didn't get here by accident. She walked into her own legacy. Clara looked down at her folded hands, humbled, but not overwhelmed. Attention didn't feed her. Praise didn't inflate her. She was older, wiser, rooted. But even she felt a tightening in her throat, a quiet, warm ache that came from a history finally acknowledged aloud. Marcus leaned in, closer voice, colder now. "And you tried to throw her out." Bryce's shoulders crumpled. He looked like gravity had doubled. "I'm sorry," Bryce whispered. I really am." Clara finally spoke again, her voice soft but heavy. "Baby, your apology isn't the part that hurts." Marcus looked at her confused. "What do you mean, Ma?" She smiled sadly. "It's not the apology, it's the fact I've had to hear versions of his words my whole life. In grocery stores, in buses, in waiting rooms. Tonight just happens to be one more." The restaurant inhaled as one. Black listeners would feel that line like a bruise, touched too soon. Marcus swallowed hard. His jaw tightened. "It shouldn't have happened here," he said almost to himself. "Not under my name." He turned back to Bryce. "You didn't just insult a guest. You insulted my mother. And you insulted this restaurant's roots." Bryce nodded, eyes wet. I know, do you?" Marcus asked. "Do you really? Because this isn't just about a table or a menu. This is about dignity, respect, humanity." He stepped toward Bryce until they were face to face. "My mother belonged here the second she walked through those doors," Marcus said. "And you treated her like background noise." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Clara exhaled, letting the room settle. Then she spoke again, her voice gentle, even light. "Marcus," she said, "baby, come sit down. You're shaking the whole place." Marcus blinked, then nodded slowly. He sat back down across from her chest, rising and falling as he calmed himself. Clara reached across the table and patted his hand once. "You're your father's son," she said. "Got that temper hiding under all that talent?" The room chuckled nervously, relieved by her softness, anchored by her grace. But Marcus wasn't done. He faced the guests this time, his voice level. "If any of you felt uncomfortable watching what happened earlier, I want you to think about how uncomfortable it felt to live it." A woman put a hand to her chest. A man looked away. Someone whispered, "He's right." Marcus nodded. "Good, because this isn't just a restaurant. It's a place built on my mother's legacy. And if you're going to eat here, you need to understand what that legacy stands for." He turned back to Clara. "She is the space," he said softly. And every single person in Laurizon heard the truth in it. The room was still trembling from Marcus's words when Clara finally shifted in her chair. She didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. She simply lifted her head with the kind of calm that comes from surviving storms people in that dining room couldn't imagine. "Marcus," she murmured, "let the boy breathe." Her son exhaled a long, tight release that softened the intensity in his shoulders. He wasn't embarrassed by the emotion he'd shown. He wasn't sorry for it either. But his mother's voice had always been his anchor, pulling him back from the edge when his fire burned too bright. Bryce looked like he'd shrunk 2 inches, palms pressed together, eyes red with shame. "Mrs. Vance, I'm really sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you like that." Clara studied him, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the eyes of an elder who had seen too much to be surprised and too much to give her heart away easily. "Son," she said gently, "hurt don't come from what you meant. It comes from what you did." Bryce nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am." The other diners leaned in, drawn to her voice, soft wise, the kind of tone that pulled people back to memories of their own mothers or grandmothers. A few guests looked ashamed. Some looked reflective. Others simply looked changed. Clara picked up the napkin in her lap and smoothed the edge between her fingers. Then she lifted her gaze, steady and tender. I could ask your boss to fire you, she said, and he'd do it in a heartbeat. Bryce's throat clicked. Everyone in the room knew it was true. But that's not what teaching looks like, Clara continued. And it sure ain't what legacy looks like. Marcus lowered his eyes. He already knew where this was going. And he let his mother lead. Clara turned to him. Baby, he can stay. The restaurant collectively gasped, not loud, but enough to ripple through the tables. Bryce's head snapped up. I can... Don't get too excited, Clara said, lips curving into a patient smile. You're gonna be learning something before the night's over. What do you want me to do? Bryce asked, voice shaking. Clara leaned back slightly, her lavender hat catching the light. Sweet tea, she said. Proper sweet tea. Not whatever y'all call tea in this place. A few people laughed, relieved, warm, genuine. The tension in the room eased for the first time since Clara walked in. Marcus smirked. You heard the woman? Go to the kitchen, grab the pitcher, and don't come back with anything that tastes like tap water and regret. Several guests burst into quiet, awkward laughter. Even Bryce cracked the smallest embarrassed smile as he hurried through the kitchen doors determined to redeem himself. As he disappeared, Clara tapped the table twice with her fingers, a gentle rhythm of satisfaction. Healing could come slow, or it could come in moments like these, small, deliberate, powerful. Marcus sat again this time with a softened posture. He reached across the table and took Clara's hand. Ma, he said quietly, I'm proud of you. She chuckled, patting his knuckles. I raised, you didn't I? That pride goes both ways. Around them, the restaurant exhaled. People whispered things like, she's incredible, and I'll never forget this, and this place is different now. Because they knew every person in that room knew they had just witnessed more than a confrontation. They witnessed a reclaiming, a quiet, powerful rewriting of space, led by a black woman who refused to shrink. Bryce returned moments later, holding a tall glass filled with amber gold tea. Clara took a sip, slow and thoughtful. She said. Not bad. Needs more sugar, but not bad. The room erupted into gentle laughter again. Bryce nearly collapsed with relief. And just like that, something changed inside those marble walls. Not just the service, not just the atmosphere, the culture. Clara didn't conquer the room with force. She didn't need to. She conquered it with truth, with legacy, with grace, sharpened over a lifetime of surviving and teaching, a storm in lavender and pearls moving with patience, but leaving a mark nobody in L'Horizon would ever forget. Hi, friend, if you made it this far, thank you. Before you go, I need your help. Our channel has been losing traction, and subscribing is the best way you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing powerful stories like this to you. Comment your city or country below. Let's see how far this community reaches. And don't forget to share this video so more people around the world can experience this story.